Living every day in your head for free. You can tap away, but I will not hear you scream. You can break your keys, spread your toxicity, your world outside reality. In your room, a little hideaway, but you let it through. Enough to go insane, living in the dark hasn't treated you well. You're building your own prison cell. Hate, rage, don't waste it on me. Spite, lies telling you, don't waste it on me. Did I brush you off? Is it your lack of friends? We never met, even if you pretend. Am I in your debt? I don't owe you nothing. Don't say something you'll regret. Hate, rage, don't waste it on me. Spite, lies telling you, don't waste it on me. Hate, rage, don't waste it on me. Spite, lies telling you, don't waste it on me. Rage, don't waste it on me. Spite, lies telling you, don't waste it. I'm telling you, don't waste it. Lies telling you, don't waste it on me.
Good evening, all. Good evening. Another impromptu coffee talk. Hope everyone's had a good day. Everyone's chilled out, relaxed. We'll be kind of breaking down. It'll be a little bit of a short one this time because it's a little bit quicker to explain the proceedings of today. Of course, coffee in hand here, still piping hot. It's leaving residue on the table. And a biggie. That's how we start. But yeah, welcome, evening everybody. Hope you're having a good day. I'll be trying to break down in the easiest way possible what the proceedings were today, why they were occurring today, and what next for the transaction for it to formally close. So sound off in chat if you hear anyway, if you're listening, if you're watching. Obviously, if you've got any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Coffee talk, and I'll put the hey, there we go. Coffee talk is a little bit more of a laid back approach. Sit, have a conversation with yourselves one-to-one about certain topics. And of course, at the minute, the certain topics seem to be all about the CMA, the FTC, regulatory process, things I don't want to drag my entire panel into and bore them to death. Also just go off to state of facts. But yes, and apologies for eating on here, but again, it's a little more of a laid back approach. like that ASMR thing of someone eating. You're going to get it. Welcome RSJ, welcome Tom. Hope all is well. I'm going to get into it today. So the purpose of today's hearing between the CMA, Microsoft, Activision, and CAT was on the original request by both the CMA and Activision and Microsoft for a pause in the CAT proceedings so that they could then discuss agreements for partial divestiture. And I'm going to go into why that was. So the hearing is today. The CAT decision today is whether or not he will give them the pause. You have a Red Bull. That's good. Yep, coffee's up, or Red Bulls, or any drinks, whatever you've got with caffeine in. Enjoy it. Yeah, the trial today, or at least the meeting today between CAT, the CMA, and Microsoft Activision was simply just so that the judge for the Competition Authority Tribunal knew that he was certain that pausing the CAT proceedings would bring about a positive end to the discussions. And by that means, i.e., we will know following these discussions between the CMA and Microsoft Activision that this will lead to a close in very quick succession. So when I pause this, but I need to know, essentially what he was asking was, I need to know that the CMA are deadly serious that if I pause this transaction, they have, in all intents and purposes, going to follow up and have those critical discussions with Microsoft in order to come up with a deal that will allow this transaction to close quickly. What he didn't want to do was say, yes, I'll pause the CAT proceedings, and then the CMA go on to delay those proceedings until the end of the month or until the end of the August deadline that they set themselves. So the judge for CAT wanted to guarantee, essentially, and get those assurances from the CMA in writing that they are intent on essentially holding their word, having those detailed discussions with Microsoft regarding an agreement so that the transaction can close. Now, the purpose of the transaction, of course, and it was touched upon, that, of course, the weekend's events did have an effect, or at least a marginal effect, and they couldn't avoid that aspect of it. The Sony agreement with Microsoft for Call of Duty was and is taken into consideration, but doesn't materially affect the outcome of the original decision. However, could the impact of that could materially affect the cloud aspect of the decision that they were talking about. So it's partially doesn't affect, but materially does affect the outcome, and it would be requiring a special consideration or special events in order to proceed with a pause in litigation so that they can iron out agreements for closure. So that's what today's hearings were about. Now, it was clear throughout the discussions, and of course I was on, like many, was on the Teams call for that, which was live, and everybody could have joined in if they had the link for that. So you could have watched the procedure. The judge was very, very hesitant all the way through to provide that pause that both companies were asking, not because of Microsoft, because they knew Microsoft wanted that pause in order to get something agreed, but he was very hesitant to provide that pause because he didn't trust the CMA had the same intention. And he specifically sought assurances, and which is why we don't have a definitive decision today. He's given a provisional decision of adjournment on the basis that evidence provided by CMA by 5 o'clock tomorrow, well, at least, sorry, evidence provided by the CMA tonight, that he has those reassurances that those discussions are going to be profitable and will come to a satisfactory conclusion. He will have a decision by 5 p.m. British time tomorrow on whether or not litigation will be paused with CAT proceedings. At that point, then Microsoft and the CMA with Activision will iron out the formal agreements. Now, there's obviously something in as a framework already set out between the CMA, Microsoft, and Activision. They've already got a framework in place there, but not finalities. So, although the framework's in place, it could take still a matter of a week or two in order to get those ironed out fully. Now, I'm going to reference here, going over to this other one, I'm going to reference here a tweet that I pointed out. When was that? July 16th? It was only yesterday. Yes, yesterday, 4:26. One of two things will happen this week regarding the Activision Blizzard, Microsoft, and CMA. Point 1. Activision Blizzard, Microsoft trigger a short extension clause and finalize structural remedies with CMA. Point 2. CMA revoke the IO, allowing the transaction to close tomorrow on the basis that the structural remedies are likely to be agreed. Additionally, for point 2, if that were the case, I'd imagine a full divestment of transaction, should the parties fail to come to an agreement, will be a clause which would end in Microsoft either closing over, worst case scenario, or apply to resume CAT proceedings. Now, obviously, what has happened is, point 1. However, as we have seen stressed by Microsoft, the judge, and the CMA, that they are very well aware of the 18th deadline, obviously tomorrow. They are very well aware of the strict time conditions that they are working under. And, of course, the agreement will still take time to put into place and action. So I think it's going to be a mixture between point 1 and point 2. So I think once the pause has been granted, and again, this is a maybe, once the pause has been granted, and I think it will be, of course, as long as the judge has got those assurances, we'll have that confirmation tomorrow. Again, he's provisionally granted the pause upon proof from the CMA, evidence from the CMA. He did not require any evidence from Microsoft as the other third party. He had to have evidence from the CMA that they are essentially trustworthy in these discussions with Microsoft, and that they are intent in following through with those. So what I believe will happen, and again, the 18th being a kind of a cut-off point there, and the paperwork will take time, and the agreement will take time to iron out with regards a structural remedy, because this is not behavioural remedy. A behavioural remedy which would mean if, for instance, that Call of Duty contract did get signed, which it did, and the CMA said, okay, that satisfies ourselves as a remedy, that contract provided between Sony and Microsoft for Call of Duty is what would be classed as a behavioural remedy, not a structural remedy. Now, the difference in a structural remedy is a form of divestment, or a section of the transaction that is partitioned off from the rest. Now, We know specifically, and Microsoft have stated this themselves, this does not involve PC, Game Pass, or console. This strictly involves cloud. So the discussions that they're discussing is strictly involving the cloud and potentially partitioning off or structurally divesting the cloud within the UK market. Now, I discussed this a few times this week as to what I think that'll look like. And I think, bearing in mind the numbers of cloud users in the UK for xCloud, which is 10,000 at most, 2,000 at really at best, that is a marginal divestment for the company. Now, again, this is also something that can be reacquired and put back into the portfolio several years down the line. They would simply just go back to the same procedures that go through regulatory process. The regulators further down the line will assess whether or not those harms that they sought are still relevant or not. If they're not relevant, then obviously they can reacquire the cloud element in the UK. If they are still relevant, then they won't. However, I think those are the proceedings that will happen. So I think, based on the timescale and how quickly they need to get things done, I think an agreement as a skeleton agreement, or at least the framework of that agreement between the CMA and Microsoft Activision, is there. But I don't think the finer details for that contract to be signed off, or the agreement to be signed off with the regulator, will be ready tomorrow. So what I think will happen is that there will be, first of all, a small extension between Activision, Blizzard, Microsoft. Now, there is a clause within the contract that allows them, without the agreement of shareholders, to extend under special circumstances for a short duration, to a matter of weeks, basically, that if you know that there is going to be a closure, however, the closure is not going to be in time, and you have the essential agreements from regulators that it will be closing, it's just that you haven't got the paperwork done in time, then of course they'll extend on those basis, which means that they do not, no one pays a 3 billion get out clause, and B, it means that no one needs to renegotiate, which are the two very big benefits there. On the other hand, what I think, to allow the transaction to progress globally, we could see the CMA tomorrow after 5 o'clock revoke the IO, which is an interim order, preventing the two companies from merging. What I think could happen on those bases, whilst they tie up the loose ends with the contract or the agreement with the CMA, if they've got a framework in place that they're both happy with and they just need to iron out the finer details, and what could happen is that the merging companies merge in other territories, and then pending merge in the UK following the restructured agreement. Again, the second point is a maybe. It's a very big maybe. But the first point absolutely stands. There will be a short extension. It won't, again, it could be a matter of days. It could be a matter of a week or two. But it won't be super long. I think, like I say, I think based on the wording in the meeting today, there is a framework in place there, and they could not discuss anything with the judge. They stipulated on multiple occasions, we cannot tell you anything about any agreements or anything we've spoke about. We cannot tell you anything that is going to be spoken about. All we can say is essentially trust that both of us are in this to get this done, and which is why we've agreed, and all parties are in agreement, that we'd like to pause proceedings on CAT in order to get the finer details of this ironed out. PS Vita OLED, it makes absolutely no difference if it's an American company. They are global companies. They are based in America, but they have head offices in every nation, which is why all judicial aspects are worldwide. They also have an agreement within the merging parties acquisition agreement that they need to get the approval of the 3 key markets, which is the EU, the UK, and the US, in order to proceed with the transaction. They cannot proceed if one of those does not accept. Now, of course, that could also mean that they go down the legal route and then get the approval via legal fighting, which they've done in the US, i.e. they had the PI thrown out, they had the appeal thrown out, and of course, although there is administrative court still going on with the FTC, they do not have any authority to block anymore in the US, which therefore means that they can close in the US. There is no more TRO over there. The TRO, believe it or not, as much as people would like to not believe, affects everybody worldwide, because you cannot close in a singular market. You have to close in all markets. It's a global company. Both of them are. Which means that if the TRO is in place, which it was with the FTC, until that TRO was lifted, which was the case last Friday, the companies couldn't merge. Now, because the TRO was lifted and the appeal failed, the companies could then close. Now, there is an IO, which is exactly the same as a TRO, between the CMA in the UK and the merging parties, which is an interim order which prevents the transaction from closing until regulatory proceedings have finished. It's commonplace. It lasts until a certain point, and usually until the final decision. But it's not a case of you can close here and not there. It's a case of they having to have a broad agreement worldwide. They have to have those 3 key markets in agreement before they can close. It's within the transactional details. Now, like I say, it will get done. It's just a case of whether it be the next few days, whether it be a week, whether it be 2 weeks. It's just a broader agreement. Yeah, I think both the FTC and the CMA haven't really done a stellar job in recent weeks. And they were pulled up on that by the judge today, essentially citing the timing of the request to extend or delay proceedings in the UK at the same time that the US were citing to delay, obviously, which was thrown out by CAT. And then, of course, the very convenient timing this weekend that the FTC, having their appeal rejected and denied, as well as the PI denied and the emergency PI denied, and then the timing of the CMA wanting to discuss things was pulled up by the judge. Rightfully so, because it is awfully convenient. We've said that, and the CMA, of course, are in denial that isn't a knock-on effect. But we can all obviously read between the lines. The judge has read between the lines. He knows why, and he knows why they're getting the agreement done now. But ultimately, this isn't a behavioural remedy. It is a structural remedy, which means it is going to take a little bit of time to iron out the contractual changes for that, which is why it is. I would say it is likely done this month. I don't think it's going to go on for any longer than a couple of weeks, and hopefully not any longer than this week. It's just a case of I don't think it is going to be resolved tomorrow. What will be resolved tomorrow is that the judge will be granting the pause. The framework of the agreement between the CMA and Microsoft Activision is there. We could see, based on that agreement, and if they have the assurances on both parties, the IO being revoked tomorrow to allow Microsoft to close in other territories, whilst this contractual change in the UK to the agreement is agreed upon and put into writing. Like I say, I expect a divestment of the cloud portion of the transaction just in the UK. Of course, the changes to the agreement in the UK are only affecting the UK. It will be the cloud segment in the UK that will be structurally partitioned off. Yeah, I know everybody's going to be sick of this by the end of it, but that's exactly why I haven't dragged in the entire panel into this discussion, because let's face it, nobody wants to discuss this week on week on week on week. And I appreciate everybody tuning into this to kind of get an understanding as to what happened today. So to kind of recap, the judge has provisionally agreed to the pause in cap proceedings on the basis that the CMA provide evidence that they are intent on carrying out discussions with Microsoft in order to close the transaction following structural changes. Again, I refer to my post from the other day. Point 1, Activision Blizzard Microsoft will trigger a short extension clause and finalize the structural remedies with CMA. So that's what I believe will happen. We could, although I think unlikely, see the IO revoked. Either way, the transaction's going to be, I think, going to be closing this month. If not, in best case scenario this week. And then we can all get on with our lives. to put it bluntly. But I'm happy to answer questions on it. If anybody's got any questions in the chat and you'd like to think about it. I know everybody's really pissed off with the UK government and the way that global transactions occur and how they work. Everyone kept on referring to the Meta case. But in terms of the Meta case, that was never brought to the CMA for scrutiny prior to closing. It closed, and then the CMA had to open a reference against it after the fact, which was the difference. Whereas this is being referenced to the CMA, they've scrutinized it through phase 1, phase 2, and then they've come to the original conclusion, which is now at the point we're at now. So it's and the reason, again, we kind of need to stipulate this as well. The reason Microsoft, there's many reasons why Microsoft are doing things by the book, but the main one will be a finger on the pulse as to what plans are going forward. What Microsoft don't want to do, and you've got to understand this, is it's, although this is all about gaming and this particular segment, Microsoft obviously acquire numerous companies on a yearly basis, many of which you guys don't see, many of which I have seen, are multi-billion and multi-million pound acquisitions constantly for smaller things here and there. Microsoft are forever purchasing to strengthen parts of their business. What they don't want to do is rock the boat with regulators by closing over or doing something rash that will cause issues down the line for further transactions and strain between agreements, specifically with the likes of Microsoft, who have government agreements with the Ministry of Defence, with the National Health Service, and so on and so forth. They've got ingrained contractual agreements with the government, and they don't want strained relationships between the government and the regulatory bodies. If and when they again go through regulatory process for further acquisitions. And that's not just on gaming, that's in general. That's where people have to kind of understand that. And that's the same with every regulatory body. The FTC approached it the wrong way. They were called out for that in Congress. The FTC are just trying to close down tech companies in general, regardless of what they're acquiring and what market it's in, without doing actual scrutiny. The EU and the UK are by merit doing things what should be the right way, although in the last couple of weeks have been strange to say the least, specifically with the CMA and FTC. But yeah, the FTC is done at this point. For those wondering, of course, I'm just referencing prior events. The FTC have no legal grounds now and will not be able to get any legal grounds to prevent the deal from closing. The TRO is over. They have been denied the PI, the preliminary injunction. They were denied a emergency preliminary injunction, and then they were also denied the appeal by the Ninth Circuit. Now, of course, it will go through administrative, but they've got no powers to stop the transaction now legally. The only thing remaining now is the IO in place from the CMA. The interim order, again, is in place until the CMA lifts that interim order, and in which case the transaction will complete. Again, personal thoughts, and thankfully this week and prior weeks and months, what I have commented regarding the transaction and how I think it will go have turned out to be correct. Nothing I have said that hasn't been correct, including the deal yesterday when they mentioned the Call of Duty contract with Sony and it didn't have a 10-year on the tweet, and I mentioned it was exactly the same agreement that was in place previously for 10 years. That was offered to every company, and that was correct. It was a 10-year agreement. There was a marginal difference though, because Microsoft had originally, this was before the 10-year agreements were offered in the first place, had offered a contract between Sony and Microsoft in order to bring all Activision content, or at least keep all Activision content and future Activision content to PlayStation, including Call of Duty, until the end of 2027. Of course, at that point, they would have been able to renegotiate the terms of that contract, as you can with every contract. However, Sony did not want that contract, and have ultimately chosen to have a contract that is only consisting of Call of Duty and no other Activision content. So any PlayStation guys listening here, the only reason that you won't get other Activision titles like Tony Hawk's, Crash Bandicoot, Spyro, or any of those games is because Sony didn't care enough to put that into a contractual agreement or ask for it. They only wanted Call of Duty. So when those games go exclusive, that is the reason why. Pete, I've got to say the deal is almost done. Of course, in retrospect, I think the framework's already laid out between the CMA and the merging parties. It's just a case of getting that put into physical form and actioned, which I think will take a number of days to do, but I think it will occur. However, they did have, or at least try to get a deadline of 5 p.m. tomorrow for that decision from the judge today. Of course, the judge will grant it. I think Microsoft have an agreement in place where they can potentially close in other territories, pending the restructure in the UK gets done. So they'll be able to notify the markets that the transaction will be closing by X date. So it could be that you get a message tomorrow from the closing or merging parties that the transaction will officially be closing on X date, and there'll be obviously then they'll have the markets notified. Shares will be removed from stock markets, etc., pending the restructure in the UK. So I think it's it'll be like a kind of an interim thing. So it might not close tomorrow, but we might tomorrow get a kind of a notification from the merging parties that they will have a closing date, a firm closing date. Okay, pending discussions with the CMA and the pause on such and such. Structural remedies are being sought in the UK, which will be X, Y, and Z, and the transaction will close, or at least will be the merging parties will close and finalize on X date. Might not be something that you see on Twitter, though I see you will see some kind of post on Twitter about it, no doubt, when that comes through. But the actual terminology of it will be more in legal documents behind the scenes and potentially the stock exchange, or stock exchanges worldwide, the FTSE, etc. A New York Stock Exchange. So yes. Yeah, so it was overall, the judge was pretty ruthless about it. He was taking no shit from the CMA, which obviously people didn't want. They didn't want him to take shit from the CMA. They wanted him to be pretty on point and questioning why now. Why haven't you done this earlier? Why did you not seek this earlier if these were potentially something that you could have done? He seemed concerned about why the CMA had not already actioned this, and the convenience of the timescale at which the FTC failed in their approach, and all of a sudden the CMA wanted to then action. So the judge did pull them on that, so all credit to the judge. He was very thorough. He also didn't hold Microsoft to account in terms of knowing what they wanted. He said, I'm not bothered. I don't need assurance from Microsoft that they are intent on closing this deal. They are the merging party. They want to close this deal. I need assurances from the CMA that they are intent on getting a resolution that will close this deal. So, yeah, beast mode, I have to agree. Both the FTC and the UK, the UK CAT judge, both did a terrific job today. Specifically this one, he was adamant that he would not sign off. He would absolutely not sign off on pausing the CAT litigation unless the CMA were absolutely, essentially guaranteed to come up with a letter of resolution with Microsoft for the transaction to close. So there's a guarantee there. This will close. There will be a resolution. It's just going to take a couple more days for it to come through. However, I do foresee that we'll see something happen tomorrow after 5 o'clock UK time. Maybe before it if the judge gives his action before that. But Microsoft requested that a decision be made from the judge, if possible, by 5 p.m. tomorrow. Dicardo, I've got to agree as well. Of course, the regulatory bodies and the government bodies are all watching everything with a keen eye. So they all want to make sure that everything is done correctly, and they all kind of look at things from a global perspective. And they have to, because of course they've got global partners in global markets, and it's not a case of just a kind of a small company buying a little company. What's happened with the CMA? Are we doing okay? So I'm going over this again. So, you mean what's happening today? What's happened today? Is that what you want an answer on, Anime? I'll wait until you respond just to get that clarification, then I'll give a summary again. You want to know what's happened today, yeah? Oh, nice and piping hot, that. This is coffee talk, by the way, chaps and ladies, whoever's watching. Yes, right, okay. So today, the CMA, Microsoft, Activision, and the CAT had a meeting in order to discuss the requested pause in litigation for the competition tribunal. That is scheduled to be on the 24th of this month, or 28th, 24th of this month, 28th. Losing track now. The discussion today was whether or not he was going to give the requested pause, so that the two parties, the CMA, Activision, and Microsoft, could discuss structural remedies in order to get the deal closed. What has transpired is the judge, essentially in short terms, questioned the CMA regarding the timing on when they've requested this following FTC's defeat in court, and the questioned the timing on why they requested a delay in proceedings at the same time as the FTC also requested a delay in proceedings, both of which were rejected by federal and UK CAT at the time. So both of those regulatory bodies were rejected on further delays, and we've come to this point where the FTC has lost. The CMA has now requested with Microsoft in order to discuss structural remedies to get the deal closed. So they've requested a pause in CAT proceedings, and the judge has to agree to that pause. What the judge wanted assurances with today was not from Microsoft, because of course they're the merging parties, so he knows that Microsoft want this transaction to close. He needed assurances from the CMA that they were intent on coming to an agreement with Microsoft in order to get this deal closed. If he did not have those legally binding assurances from them, which he has requested this evening, then he would not grant the pause. Now, so what he's done is give a provisional pause on the proviso that the CMA has provided the legal clarification in writing to the judge that they are intent on coming to an agreement with Microsoft in order for the transaction to close. Microsoft has requested that the decision from the judge ultimately be before 5 o'clock tomorrow, likely so that they can look to begin closing procedures for the transaction. Of course, by that we mean monetary exchange. It might not be legally binding until the transaction is signed off in the UK, but monetary transaction, the change of money, may happen tomorrow. So they've requested a 5 p.m. deadline with the judge if possible. However, like I say, the provisional agreement to pause the CAT proceedings was given today on the basis that the CMA provide legal assurances that they are intent on coming to an agreement with Microsoft to close the transaction. And that will ultimately be there this evening. He requested it tonight. So I foresee that the sign-off from the judge will be pretty swift tomorrow, as long as he has those assurances from the CMA this evening. So, yes, so state of play, where we are right now, just to recap. I believe point one, I've said this the other day, which is why I've stuck with it, and it has turned out to be true. I believe point one is what's going to occur. Activision, Blizzard, Microsoft will trigger a short extension clause that they have in their contract. So they've got an agreement between each other, of course, for the transaction. There is an agreement in special circumstances that the merging parties, the two key figures, so essentially the head guys at Activision Blizzard and at Microsoft, can sign off without shareholder approval on a temporary or a short-term extension to the transaction. When they know that under special circumstances the transaction is likely to close, but not by the agreed date. So it's likely to be number one, potentially with a sprinkling of number two. And I say potentially because I still don't know whether or not the CMA will revoke the IO in order for everything else to close. But I think everything should start to get ironed out tomorrow, but it could take a few days for contracts to be fully agreed with the CMA regarding structural remedies, and how that plays out. Of course, being a structural remedy means that we need to divest part of the business off, and that's not going to be a quick process. So it's about that moderation. And obviously the CMA laying out, okay, well, you have X amount of time in order to divest the cloud to another party. In this instance, that's what they'd be looking to divest. Microsoft stipulated, again, for the benefit of everybody, Microsoft stipulated this is not regarding console or PC. This is specifically around cloud. So the divestment or the structural change will be only around cloud. Now, again, the UK market for cloud is 10,000 at most, but average figure for cloud users in the UK on xCloud is 2,000. So it's not a significant dent or problem. So it's as long as, again, they're able to bring that content to console and PC on Game Pass, they don't really see that as harming their consumers, and rightfully so. RJ, they don't need 2 more months. That was just a time scale there. They've actually the judge kind of stressed again today that it wasn't going to take that long, and in matter of fact, he stipulated that it may, obviously, unless an agreement can come up to place before the original CAT decision date, which would have been the 24th of the month, then it wouldn't have been worthwhile proceeding with the pause. So it's just a loose time frame by the CMA on that front. However, they've got, in all intents and purposes, the assurances to the judge, which the judge sought, to get the transaction closed in the next week or so, as opposed to 2 months. So there's no issues with that. Yeah, exactly. It is a small wait. It's not massively extended. Do I think the deal will close today or tomorrow? No, the deal won't close today or tomorrow. What will likely happen tomorrow will be a small extension, as I've mentioned, to the transaction. A small one. Again, it means that the companies do not need to renegotiate, and nobody needs to pay out a 3 billion walk away fee. But you can rest assured, both parties, both Activision Blizzard and Microsoft, are not intent on walking away. They're intent on getting this closed. They have regulatory approval in literally every other nation now. So it's, at this point, it would be foolish for any party to walk away literally at the last hurdle. So there's nobody going to do that. There's nobody going to be requesting 3 billion and walk away fee. And yeah, the short extension can be triggered in a small clause that they've got in the contract there under special circumstances, that they can essentially trigger a small extension to the agreement without renegotiation and without shareholder notification or feedback. They can do that under special circumstances, and this is special circumstance, which is what they're arguing today, or have argued today with CAT. So it's special circumstance. Essentially, it's the end game. The CMA and Microsoft are discussing the structure of the structural remedy. I think they've already got a framework in place for that agreement. It's just a matter of days, if not a week or so, until that is in place. So I think it will close very soon, like very soon. We could see proceedings of close begin tomorrow following 5 p.m, if not before 5 p.m. Microsoft stipulated that. I think the CMA are aware of that as well. The CMA can't go around the judge. Yeah, it's a bit different. The CMA are unable to go around the judge. The only way the CMA could do it would be to present it to CAT. Likewise, Microsoft can only present anything to CAT or request things to CAT. It's much like the federal judge being in charge of the FTC and essentially having final rule over that. Like, there is nobody else that can go past that, and the FTC have no teeth without that agreement in place as well. Like I say, I have to stress, the judge today was good. He sought assurances and is getting legal assurances in writing from the CMA that they are intent on getting this deal done. He has stipulated, regardless of the structural change, the judge said this, regardless of the structural change, Microsoft will acquire Activision Blizzard. That was the judge's words. So we know it's happening. They will acquire them. Now is a matter of days. If not, potentially hours. We don't know what framework agreement is in place with the CMA and Activision and Microsoft. If that framework is pretty much tied up, they just couldn't tell the judge because they're not allowed to tell the judge under law what the agreement is and if they have an agreement there. If that is the case and they have an agreement ready to rock and roll, come 5 o'clock tomorrow, they're signing off on that agreement. They begin work on the divestiture of the cloud portion. The transaction could close tomorrow evening, if not Wednesday. However, there could be a small, like I say, a small trigger of an extension, and if it runs in for another couple of days and close by week's end, but I think it'll be marginal. I think the extension would only be a short-term one. I think the extension would probably cover till the end of the month, just in case. But I think it'll close before that. So, yes. Now, Microsoft's not playing. They have to play nice. They have to play nice. It's a lot of people have to understand here. This is a big tech transaction. This is one of the largest, if not the largest, tech transaction in the history of regulatory authorities. It's a 70 billion acquisition. So Microsoft being nice is not just because it's a gaming transaction, but Microsoft have and are consistently making acquisitions all year round in different markets and are going through regulatory approval for different transactions consistently through legal teams for things for Windows, for things for cloud, for things for AI. They are consistently acquiring small firms or programs or development companies or software. They are consistently purchasing things. What they don't want to do is ruffle feathers, cause issues, and have problems with regulators further down the line when they come to making another large transaction, which is inevitable. Microsoft are making transactions all of the time outside of just the gaming space. So Microsoft will abide by that. What don't I know? It's as much as people want it to close over, and trust me, I want this to end as much as anybody else. Microsoft are a multi-trillion-dollar organization for a reason. Like, they literally can't do anything else on the PC space. They can't really expand the PC space because they have that much of a dominant market on the operating system, i.e. Windows, that if they were to do anything regarding Windows and that would enable Windows to expand and encroach on the market any further, it would be a monopoly for that reason. Like, they literally cannot expand the Windows segment of that. Like, Windows is everywhere. They already have a complete, like, filter to that. No, I don't see any. I really don't see any changes to CMA leadership after it as well. Who do I think will purchase next in the UK? Do you mean gaming wise or in general? Because in general, Microsoft are forever purchasing things. It could be AI. To be fair, they're investing a lot in AI at the moment, and AI tech, and investing in companies and shares in companies, etc. with regards to AI. But yeah, in terms of what I would expect for acquisitions on the gaming front going forwards, we will likely see smaller acquisitions, little studios. I don't foresee any publisher acquisitions for at least another year, if not 2 years, if they have any publisher acquisitions in the pipeline. I think they'll give themselves a bit of a break on that front. You've got to think they've been literally every day for the last 2 years working on getting this transaction closed. I think they'll get a little bit of a break. They'll do smaller transactions that don't require regulatory approval. For instance, regulatory approval for transactions to finite scrutiny like this one is anything over $1 billion. So if you're closing smaller studios, for instance, like the likes of Insomniac was, which is 250 mil, you don't have to seek regulatory approval for it. So I think smaller studios over the next year or so, and I don't think they'll revisit doing publisher acquisitions for a while. Yeah, even Tom, even after what we would class as an embarrassment, as much as they might look a fool on the gaming segment, what I have to give benefit of doubt on this is that this is the largest gaming transaction in the history of tech and in the industry. As much as the CMA, the FTC, and regulatory bodies have had a little bit of time to understand the industry and its details, they don't thoroughly understand the industry to its core and where the industry will go. They don't have the ability to foresee where the industry will be, and they don't really understand it in general. That doesn't mean that they don't understand other markets that they've worked on much more intensively. So, for instance, in the healthcare market, they've worked on significantly because there is always acquisitions in the healthcare market, and there's always transactions going on that front. When it comes to multi-billion-dollar acquisitions of publishers with regards to gaming, that's relatively new territory for many of the regulatory bodies. Like, we haven't seen something of such size ever, so they don't really have an understanding of and it's become apparent, of course, which is why it looks so embarrassing when you look into some of the details they bring up and the mistakes that they make, is because they don't have an understanding, and they're quite trying over the last 2 years to get a very in-depth understanding of the industry, which is a very short period of time. But they usually deal with merging energy companies, merging water companies, merging healthcare firms, things along those. Like, those are very common things that they deal with all of the time. So they're very adept at dealing with them. So they do a good job in blocking those or causing or making sure those are fair for the market. But a market they don't truly understand is where the water gets grey and kind of hard and murky to deal with. So yeah, the FTC is a different story as well. The FTC didn't go in with the intention of looking at the full details. The FTC went in with the intention of just blocking, which is why they didn't get any far. If the FTC went in with the idea of actually regulating this and on its merits, trying to understand, then they would have probably got a bit further, but I still think it would have ultimately led to approval, because had they done the jobs correctly, but they weren't intent on doing that in the first place, as was laid out, it wouldn't have proceeded the way it did in America. So a little catch up here. Hypothetically speaking, if the judge don't trust the CMA enough and don't grant the pause, can Microsoft then close over the CMA tomorrow? RJ, as much as I was saying hypotheticals here, the only way the judge would grant the pause is, and he's already stipulated this, he said, I will grant it provisionally tonight based on the evidence being provided to me this evening, which the CMA are providing to him. So if he doesn't do it, then CAP proceedings will begin as usual, and then we'll go through an extension procedure. They won't close over. Still not worth it. Still not worth it. But you can, I think you can rest assured at this point, the CMA will provide the evidence. The judge will grant the order in order to pause CAP proceedings, and it will progress nicely here on in. Thank fuck. Uh, Spider-Man, I completely agree. The judge was understanding, was understanding the game, and yeah, the judge in the FTC was very sharp on understanding what things were and asked the right questions. The FTC didn't have the intention of learning the industry like the judge did, which is why they learned so quickly what it's like doing that. The judge on the cat case was equally the same. The judge was very fair, but he wanted legal assurances from the CMA that they were absolutely intent on getting this over the line. Good status. What is next Xbox acquisition and how soon? Next year, a studio. I don't know of which studio, but next year and a studio. Probably a smaller one. Maybe is there anything between a 10 and 100 man team? A couple of, like, 50 million or slightly above. Not a big transaction. Publisher wise, you're talking a couple of years, I think. As a consumer, I want to enjoy the spoils and plunder of ABK before considering the next purchase. Do you mean what you're going to buy from or that belongs to ABK? Are you referring to Game Pass editions? I think you'll see Game Pass editions following the closure at some point, either next month or the month after. I don't know how the COD procedure works now, though, with the agreement with Sony, whether or not they've foregone their contracts for advertising next year, or whether or not they keep it. I don't know how that would work. That's something that we'll probably not find out until close at the time. It's going to be strange to see how that plays out. Tom, I just want them to close over and watch the world burn. To be fair, it would be an absolute mess. Soul Eater, hello. Going well. Hope everyone's got their coffees or drinks or teas or whatever you're doing. CMA can DDT the FTC through the table with BMG. Gaz, hello there, sir. How you doing, sir? Oh god, I had to wait a minute to see that one. I can absolutely CMA the can DDT the FTC through the table with an MBG. With MBG, I know who you're referring to now. Jesus Christ, I need to sip more coffee here. BitCloud, definitely smaller studios for more workforce on games. Yep, definitely. They've already highlighted as well in the leaked report through in the FTC, which was quite amusing. They've highlighted some studios that what their classes fill gaps in portfolio. I think those are the acquisitions that you'll likely see next year. Or these studios where they go, oh, well, these create this type of game because it fills a gap that we have in our portfolio. That's what I think we'll see. 3-bit, yes. The CMA have till tonight to send across essentially the legal assurances to the judge that they are intent on following up and finding an agreement with the closing parties, so that he can grant the pause. So he's provisionally granted the pause on the proviso that the CMA provide that evidence, which they're going to do now, and they've said they're more than happy to provide that evidence. So that's what they're doing. And Microsoft have stipulated that they want the judge, or at least have requested, they need a judge to have a decision before 5 o'clock. The judge is wary on the speed of which this needs done, and how in terms of financially how this affects both parties. So we'll likely see before 5 o'clock tomorrow decisions, movement, and timescale for closure. But yeah, we're literally in the end game here. It's just a case of, I think, fortunately, again, I was right when it comes to what would likely happen. Transaction isn't closing today. The judge was very hesitant to give the pause, not because of Microsoft, but because of the CMA. He's getting the legal assurances from the CMA this evening on a provisional pause, and he will grant the pause tomorrow based on the fact that he has received those legal assurances this evening. I think we'll see, based on the timescale and how quickly things need to move tomorrow, we'll see a short extension from the merging parties so that the transaction can close either later on this week or the beginning of next week. And I think that's it. That pretty much wraps that up. Whew. Coffee black, 2 sugars. Oh, see, I'm 2 sugars lost, boom, but I'm a coffee with evaporated milk, carnation as everybody knows it, and 2 sugars, or a latte or a cappuccino. Today it's just a coffee, but always with evaporated milk. It has to be creamy. If was it RJ, if it was in Microsoft's shoes, I would rather paid double to get Ubisoft instead of letting Sony get it. I wouldn't want that headache. If you think Activision Blizzard's in a mess, I just wouldn't want the headache that is Ubisoft. Ubisoft have 20,000. In fact, is that yeah? They have 20,000 employees at Ubisoft, which is, I think, double of that of Activision, who have 10,000. It's such a headache. I wouldn't want that. And you've got, like, the vast majority of Ubisoft studios are only working on Assassin's Creed games. So, yeah, I don't think, just for those reasons, I don't think you'll see anybody look at acquiring Ubisoft. I think they'll just stay as is. Same with Take-Two. I don't know why people think that's a thing. Take-Two don't need to be acquired by anybody, and they don't want to be acquired by anybody, so I don't think it'll happen. Take-Two are very self-sufficient. They're a multi-billion-dollar a year organization. They make money. They print money. They don't need acquisition. They are not in a financial state that would require acquisition. Okay. ABK has 16,000 workers. Okay, so thanks. I stand slightly corrected there. 20. Yeah, so it's 20,000 for Ubisoft. Though it's massive. Yeah, I know what Destin said. It happens. Destin also said though that he thinks it closes today. However, he also said today though, after saying that he doesn't think there's going to be an extension, highlighting this tweet that I've got on screen here. He said that he thinks there's going to be an extension today. I said, who'd have thought? Who'd have thought? So shout out to Destin. Thanks for highlighting my tweet on your video. I'll re-highlight that tweet that you highlighted, saying that I already said there was going to be an extension, albeit marginal. That's why I said short. Could be a number of days, could be a number of a week. It's going to be a short one, but it's going to get the transaction done. My wife thinks she has milk in her coffee. Daz, get your filth out of here. And take your pineapple with you. What else have I missed here? What else have I missed? I can see PlayStation going hard for Ubisoft, but if... and we will see Xbox Store on PlayStation with a new European law about online stores. I'm not sure about that, to be honest. I'm really not sure about that. We'll see how that pans out, because there's going to be a few little strange things going on there. Let's see what else we've got through here. RSG, I completely agree. Microsoft will not buy any more studios, at least in the short term. Sorry, publishers, at least in the short term. I think it's going to be a year or two until we'll see potential publisher talk again. But I do foresee smaller studios definitely being acquired. Gap filler studios, as I like to refer to them. Oh, you've been milk intolerant. Yeah, enough of that. Thankfully, I'm not. I think I'd probably want to damage myself if I was milk intolerant. I drink too much of it. I love milk. It's probably not a line you wanted to hear today, but I drink a lot of milk and coffee. I think you try to lock down IO Interactive as soon as possible. Yeah, IO is a good one. IO's within the remits of not requiring regulatory approval. They could close that for an easy buck. I also agree Take-Two is highly organized and ahead of the curve. Absolutely. There's also a lot of outgoings at Take-Two that people don't seem to understand, like the amount of rights that they have to pay out on in terms of the music and things like that for the game is substantial. And they've got a lot of radio stations, a lot of authorized tracks that they've paid for. So yeah, it's a costly one, but they make a lot of money in the process, and they're very self-sufficient. They will not be requiring acquisition, and they don't need to be. So I don't think they'd entertain the idea from anybody. Also, I think if Take-Two was acquired, the regulators would see that as something that harms competition, because there is no benefit other than removing content from one platform to another. There is no benefit to acquiring Take-Two, which would be anti-competitive. Like, Take-Two as a company don't have any technologies that would further benefit Microsoft. They don't have any technologies that would further benefit Sony. So the only thing you'd be buying Take-Two for is the IP. And if it's IP removal, then that's going against competitive behavior, because then it's just removing competition from the sake of removing competition. And a publisher of that size would definitely harm. If you're thinking about the amount of money that Call of Duty prints, like GTA 5 is one of the most sold games in the history of games, and it continues to sell, just like Minecraft, for instance, which is why Minecraft has remained multi-plat. So yeah, Take-Two is not going anywhere. No one's getting that. Yes, Diablo 4 Season 1 tomorrow. Anybody that bought the Ultimate Edition, like myself and many others, you get the first season, or at least the first season, as part of your Ultimate Edition. You don't need to get that season pass. The next one, you can. However, you can actually choose to ignore the first season and buy that, and then use the free one next month. It's entirely up to you when you do it. You think this delay will cause the FTC case that was supposed to happen in August to happen? No, the FTC have no legal ground to object anymore. Like, they've run out of legal authority, thankfully. The TRO is removed, so there is no ability to block. The PI, the original preliminary injunction, was also denied. The emergency PI was denied, and the appeal was denied. Even if they go to administrative court, they have no legal authority to block the transaction anymore, so it makes no difference what happens. Sega's next. No, I don't think Sega will be next, because it's a publisher. I think Sega will be a way down the way. I think they'll give a little bit of a break before they do that. I think we'll see studios before we see any publishers. Certifinity is dealing with much of a Halo IP. This should probably be on the extremely short list. There's no doubt studios like that will be on the short list, but no publishers. No, it depends. So this is where it gets a little bit murky, Nate. So anything that is over 1 billion, you have to refer to the regulatory authorities for approval. Anything below 1 billion, you can close. And if the regulatory authorities look at the transaction post-close and find issues, then they can refer that to investigation. Which is why you saw or have seen smaller things regarding Meta acquisition. That one, they didn't refer themselves because of its size. CMA found an issue and referred it post-close, which is what caused the issue. So it is murky ground. It is murky ground. They are completely toothless now. Yes, the FTC has lost its teeth at this point. Yeah. Probably going to play season 1. Okay, Remnant 2 is higher on my list than season 1. That's fair. That's fair. Is there any further questions before we wrap up today's coffee talk? It's been a blast as usual. We went on for an hour and 15. I think we've covered everything. So to summarize today's events, double barrel gaming tomorrow. Probably not tomorrow. I'll be on prime time on Wednesday. I'm on the prime time podcast on Wednesday. So if he covers that on Wednesday, then yes, absolutely. To be fair, I think it'll roll. The deal will potentially roll into the end of the week anyway. So it's likely we'll be talking about this on Wednesday. But yeah, if you want to watch us on Boom Show to kind of delve more into it, then yeah, I'll be on primetime gaming on Wednesday evening. But yeah, briefly summarize. So the CAT hearing today was regarding the pause in CAT proceedings. No, I think we'll hear about any potential extension tomorrow because that's the cutoff point. The Microsoft and Activision lawyers stressed to the judge that they need a decision on the pause by 5 o'clock tomorrow. So I think you'll hear something after 5 tomorrow from Microsoft after Activision regarding whatever they do next. But it's likely that it's just a matter of days or a week before this is entirely closed, I think. But the judge essentially has today has granted a provisional pause in the CAT proceedings on the proviso that the CMA provide legal and written assurances to the judge that they are intent on discussing the transaction, at least, on closing or coming to an agreement with regard to structural remedies that will close the transaction with Microsoft. So once the judge has those legal assurances, then he will grant at some point tomorrow the pause in the CAT proceedings. I already believe that the CMA and Microsoft Activision have a framework agreement in place for the structural remedy, and so something might already be ready to rock and roll following that pause. But they can't finalize those details until given that pause agreement by the judge. So I think once they do, then they'll go through with that and we'll start to see the ball rolling for the remainder of the week on getting this transaction closed. But I think transaction could be done by the end of the week, if not next week. Like completely done, over, no need to talk about it again. Thank God. Thanks for stopping in, Sarge. Have an appointment in a few minutes, but wanted to drop in and show some support for WandrinDutch. Always a great guy. Thank you, Dutch, Sarge. Much appreciated. Much appreciated. And thank you for everybody who stopped in. Actually, said quite over 100 people stopped in today just to talk to me, yabber on about this. So much appreciated. I am sweating buckets, as you can see here. Not a pretty sight. But I hope it helped understand what happened today and the proceedings. But we're definitely at the end game here. The good news is that the judge only gave the provisional pause today based on the assurances from the CMA that they would send over that they were going to come to a structural agreement with Microsoft to get the transaction to close. So the deal will close. That's essentially what's happening right now. We're just waiting on that cutoff point. So I think tomorrow you'll see what will happen. You'll see a short extension, and I think the transaction will ultimately close within the next to giving it a wide berth, and I'm going to say it now. This is a wide berth kind of timescale. I think we'll see it within the next 2 weeks. We could see it within the next couple of days. Close out, finished, agreements in place, done. Thank God. And thank you to Tom from Toonami there with a $2 super chat. He says, "Here's to watching the CMA's world crash down." Indeed, indeed. It's been a strange 2 years watching this unfold. But we're at the end game now. And I'll be happy when it's done. And hello, Gamepass Daily. Thank you, sir. Thank you for stopping in. Of course, for anybody who's joined at the end and you didn't catch kind of the discussion of what's happened and you want to hear a breakdown of today, of course, you can watch this on demand. You can skip all the way back and watch it from the start. But appreciate everybody turning up today. Thank you for all the support. And again, don't worry, Game Pass Daily. Don't you worry. You can skip the beginning. You can hear my thoughts and of course my point, which is on screen now, that there will be a short extension in order to get this finalized, but it's only small. But yeah, if you just missed it, of course, rewind, get to the start. I covered everything in as much detail as I could, but I tried to make it understandable, so I hope that's portrayed. But thank you to everybody who stopped by again as usual for another coffee talk. Hopefully the next one's going to be about something actually gaming related and not talking about regulators, but as long as I'm putting things in a little bit of layman's terms so everybody can understand proceedings, that's all that matters to me, so everybody can kind of understand, get a good understanding of where things are, and potentially, if people are worried about what's happening, alleviate those concerns. Yeah, yeah, I think you are right, Red Monkey. I think Blizzard's happy that they've got a few more weeks of sales before they go into Game Pass. I think that's right. Yeah, adamant they weren't going in, but it's not their choice when they've been acquired. But yes, thank you once more. If you did enjoy this, please like, share, and subscribe. Much appreciated. And for those who have subscribed or following this, appreciate the support. I hope you enjoy the content that we bring and our discussions. Of course, always want to be discussing more the facts than we do just speculation. So that's what we try to bring. And if we don't have facts backing up, then we will stipulate our opinion as opposed to a fact. So at least you know what it is, both good and bad, or opinion versus fact. But appreciate it again once more to everybody. Have an absolutely awesome evening, and enjoy your gaming. So have a good one, guys, and we'll see you later.